I'm Sally Jastrzębska and you're watching World Talks here on TVP World. No bloc of countries has for the past 75 years been as closely tied to the United States as Europe. We are talking about the world's most extensive bonds in trade, finance and investment. Europe could also depend on the US military support, enshrined in the NATO alliance. However, after Donald Trump was elected the next US president, the question of how would Europe cope if these defense ties were severed or diminished is asked more and more often. This is also what we're going to deal with, as I'm joined by Aleksander Cwalina, Assistant Director, Eurasia Center, Atlantic Council. Hello, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Hello. Good morning and good afternoon.
So let's start with the situation in Ukraine. During one of his speeches, Friedrich Merz, the leader of Germany's conservative opposition, encouraged European countries to create an alliance and agree on a common vision for peace in Ukraine. He said, and here I quote, "With the change of power in the US, there is a possibility we will have a new situation and we have to prepare for it. We have to create a common strategy." So what could that strategy entail, and does it have a chance of coming into fruition?
So as we opened up today on U.S. leadership in NATO, as a key member of NATO, U.S. leadership does play an important coordinating role in the alliance. And Europe, if needed, will be able to defend itself without the United States. This, of course, depends on the length and severity of such a conflict, presumably with Russia. Europe has made significant progress on raising the alarm for potential conflict, but there is significant room for improvement, as you mentioned, for example, through possible plans by Friedrich Merz and others. One of these improvements on Europe is, for example, a unified leadership position. This is something that I believe Merkel sort of played a very important role in being the sort of leader or voice of Europe. And with the fracturing in the German government, with elections set to be next month, but also with sort of the tumultuous moments right now with the French government as well, there is no clear voice within Europe to sort of lead the charge for a possible peace or for plans ahead. And this is where the United States plays an important role, but also Poland and other European capitals that are closer to the front lines with Ukraine.
Right, and so now let's talk about defense spending, right? I mean, this is another hot topic, I would say. So Donald Trump mentioned many times that the US would absolutely consider leaving NATO should allies not pay up their bills, right? So, but it seems that members of NATO did increase their defense commitments, and I have some numbers here. So, since 2022, Europe's NATO allies have ramped up their defense spending by almost a third, and now we have a total of $476 billion. That's according to NATO. And as of June, 23 of NATO's 32 members also met their defense spending target, right? 2% of GDP. That is the NATO target. And it is twice as many as 4 years ago. I mean, as many countries, right? So do you think that this trend will be maintained? And perhaps these fears are not justified, right, of US leaving NATO if everyone continues their efforts?
Yes, defense spending is something that Europe has made significant progress on, but there is always room for improvement. For example, NATO member countries chose Secretary General Mark Rutte this year to succeed former Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And in his first public appearance in Brussels yesterday, Secretary General Rutte has already come out strong about the need to boost military budgets and a need to turbocharge defense production. On relationship with the U.S., he is also known for having a cordial relationship in Trump and as center-right in the Netherlands, also known to have a potential for deal-making when working with various factions of both the right and the left. Similarly, regarding the budget, the 2% is the minimal floor of what many consider to be the optimal budget for defense production. And there has been speculation that might be raised to 3% for in the next by 2030 or so. What is also important to consider is that Russia itself is on a war footing. A third of the Russian state budget, which is approximately 6% of its GDP, is currently going straight into its military. This is also not in addition to raised military budgets and cooperation with Russia, with China, Iran, and North Korea. This represents something that both Europe and the United States have to contend with in both coordinating defense production, but also increasing spending and defense production as well.
Mm-hmm. So let's turn to the question of Russia, as you've already hinted at that. So General Christopher Cavioli, right, NATO's supreme commander, warned last month that Russian military would emerge stronger than it is today, I mean, after the war. So, so could we already see Russian meddling in the affairs of some strategic countries from the standpoint of NATO, such as Romania recently, right? So how do you see what will be Russia's actions? Can we already see some of that? And what are we expecting?
Thank you for mentioning Romania. It is one of the many axes, I would say, of Russia's hybrid threat strategy. For example, meddling not only in the elections of Romania, but also in Moldova, in Georgia, as we're seeing in Tbilisi, in Russia coming out in full support for their halting of EU accessions. This is something that Russia is very happy to see, sort of more and more countries either distancing or becoming cautious of further European integration. And more on hybrid threats, it is not only just meddling in elections or in the public information sphere, it is also more, I would say, kinetic or damaging hybrid threats. For example, we saw just earlier this month the Chinese flagged ship spotted in the Baltic Sea next to fiber optic cables that were cut. The jamming of GPS signals that have disrupted flights and air travel in Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland, and additionally, what many suspect to be Russian operatives smuggling incendiary devices on cargo planes through DHL in Germany. These, for example, though not warranting a full-scale response, such as Article 5 as enshrined in NATO, these attacks show a consistent Russian probing of European weaknesses and defenses, and that needs to be either addressed and mitigated.
Right. So, I mean, what steps need to be taken? Because, I mean, do we have a plan, or what would need to happen in the future for Europe to be fairly safe?
I would say this is something to be left to more intelligence sharing between European governments and the United States, more monitoring of sort of the soft spots for hybrid threats, whether it's in information warfare or it's these sort of sabotage or other forms of hybrid warfare. This needs to be something that needs to require more coordination between NATO member states and the United States and European countries, not members of either. This is something that's only going to become more of an issue as Russia continues to probe the defenses in Central and Eastern Europe and abroad.
Right, and you've mentioned these countries that are NATO members, not necessarily EU members, and here, of course, we have UK and Turkey. So what is their role? Do you think that there will be more cooperation between the EU and these countries, for instance?
I believe yes. It is hard not to create an EU-wide response without including the countries that aren't in the EU. Another sort of promising sign of increased cooperation with those countries and the EU's seriousness about addressing these sorts of threats is the appointment for the first ever EU Defense Commissioner, Andrius Kubilius from Lithuania, to not only address the production and coordinated defense coordination in Europe, but also sort of Europe's response to these threats, and also the European Union's outreach to these countries that aren't in the EU or that aren't in the EU and on the border in Central and Eastern Europe to address these threats and other defense matters.
Right, and of course, because we're in Poland, I wanted to ask you about NATO's eastern flank. Can we expect new projects being introduced here? What can NATO's eastern flank do to protect itself better?
I'm glad you mentioned Poland because Poland is one of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe that has been most vocal and most productive in recognizing the threat that Russia poses, both through its history in the past, but also by being bordered by both Belarus and Russia. Poland has significantly increased its military procurement budget and remains one of the most viable country in the region to serve as a headquarters in mobilizing future defense effort. It has also served as a headquarters for mobilizing humanitarian, military and defense deliveries to Ukraine and remains one of Ukraine's staunchest partners. And in terms of defense, increased defense capabilities, Poland remains one of the U.S.'s key partners, and has also taken this need to both turbocharge spending and military production within the alliance seriously, with many expecting the defense budget in Poland to rise to 4.7% of GDP in 2025, which is more than the current floor of 2%, and more than the expected future floor of 3%.
Right. So just to round up our conversation, of course, Trump's term begins in January. So sort of what is the time frame for some of these changes? I mean, what can we expect and how soon, right?
In regards to the U.S. and NATO or within Europe?
Either or both.
Sure. So it's interesting. One of the interesting things about Trump's administration, Trump 2.0, is that the big plus and minus of Trump is that he is unpredictable. There may be a lot of very quick changes that are good or bad vis-a-vis foreign policy that come out of the new Trump administration, and it's difficult to tell in the first couple of months. But the first year, usually in administrations, is one of the more bolder years before the midterms and before many of the lawmakers serving in this government shift to re-election efforts. I don't expect Trump is going to make a significant effort to leave or reduce the U.S.'s commitment to NATO, but still there's that fear within many European capitals, and I assume that is something that both the new Secretary General Mark Rutte in both encouraging increased defense spending and coordination, and also the European Commission through its new defense commissioner will take steps towards in the next year in the new European Commission and into the next year as we see the war in Ukraine continue.
Interesting year ahead of us, that's for sure. Aleksander Cwalina, thank you so much for being with us. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks, and please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.